Welcome to the Sustainability in Wine Country online series hosted by Cork and Pork in Logan Circle in Washington, D.C. My name is Antoinette Londejean, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. We will start this class with a brief introduction, followed by our guest speaker's presentation and introduction to their organization. This is the 10th and final masterclass in the Sustainability in Wine Country series focusing on sustainability in viticulture. The first masterclass of the series addressed the efforts made by the New Zealand wine growers in their sustainability movement. The second was with the Lodi Rules team and Dr. Stephanie Bolton. The third was with the Fish-Friendly Farming Certification Program of the California Land Stewardship Institute, hosted by Laurel Marcus. The fourth was with Dr. Marty Longbottom, the Sustainability and Viticulture Manager at the Australian Wine Research Institute. The fifth was Anna Britton's presentation on Napa Green. The sixth was all about the South African wine industry's sustainability movement, hosted by Jim Clark. The seventh was a wine tasting with Wine Australia's Head of Education, Mark Davidson. The eighth was the Porter Protocol with Marta Mendoza. The ninth was with Wines of Alentejo and their Sustainability Program Manager. And tonight's class is with the Jackson Family Wines. Jackson Family Wines channels innovation to address global changes in a bold 10-year plan that's appropriately named Rooted for Good. This commitment is leading the wine industry with the goal to become climate positive, to create positive social impact, and to support the Jackson family's long-term vision for a sustainable future. Our guest host for this presentation is Aaron Schreiber Stainthorpe, the Sustainability Manager at Jackson Family Wines. In his role, Aaron focuses on implementing systems that drive transformational change with an emphasis on carbon emissions, energy efficiency, renewable energy, water conservation, zero waste, and employee engagement. Aaron has spent 7 years working in wine and previously led sustainability efforts at Francis Ford Coppola Winery, resulting in their 2017 Sustainable Winemaking Leadership Award from the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance. Aaron also serves as a board member with the Climate Center, focused on speed and scale greenhouse gas policy solutions in California. We are excited to introduce you, our viewers, to Aaron, and delighted to now begin the presentation. Thank you to all for being a part of this Sustainability in Wine Country series. We hope you enjoy it. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Great. Annette, thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here just listening to the speakers that you've had to date. It sounds like this has been great for giving really a deep overview of different efforts on wine sustainability across the world. So I'm thrilled that we can be part of this, and I'm very excited to talk about what we're doing here at Jackson Family Wines. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to walk through just kind of a high-level overview of how we see sustainability and where we see opportunities to innovate and why this should matter, why we think sustainability is the future, and why we hope other people get excited about the direction we're headed. So to start, we just unveiled our 10-year roadmap for the future. I think as we record this, Glasgow is happening in Poland, COP26, and people are talking about the fate of the world in terms of climate change. 2030 is a big date there, and 2030 is a big date for us. So when we talk about Rooted for Good, we've really tried to outline where do we want to go over the next 10 years. And then that's what I'm going to start by walking us through. But before I do that, maybe just to take a quick step back for people that are not familiar with Jackson Family Wines, before I get too far ahead of myself, we're a family-owned wine company, primarily based in California, but with operations across the globe, really in winemaking regions that just have their distinct quality and that the family has been very captivated by. So you can see we have quite an interesting portfolio of wineries. And if we look at wine brands, here you'll see some wines that are in grocery stores all across the US, but you also see some wines that are very exclusive. And I think it's very unique to be working for a family that has that portfolio and can speak to something like Kendall Jackson Chardonnays, which has been America's #1 Chardonnay 25 years in the running. Or we can look at something like Cardinal, which is a very exclusive wine to go after. And I think the retail price that you'll find per bottle is just in a very different category. And being able to span the breadth of those different wine types means that we can talk about different challenges with producing quality wine for different demographics and different taste profiles. And so I think we're very proud of kind of that breadth of the portfolio that we bring. And I'll also add, being a family-owned wine company, we were founded by Jess Jackson in the 1980s, and he started being, he got involved in wine kind of as an accidental second career, which is a fascinating story to hear about. And if you're ever curious, A Man in His Mountain is a book that details that. But he famously said, take care of the land and it'll take care of you. And I think that ethos really has been with the Jackson family throughout the company's founding, and you see it today. And so I hope this motto helps kind of encapsulate what we're trying to do right now. So just a few slides, and then I'll get into kind of our roadmap. But where our journey started, I mean, it's been quite a road, but one of the things that we learned early on is that sustainability certifications, that gives us that third-party process of going through and essentially saying that we are following best practices. And so we've been a big fan of really working with these certifying parties to make sure that all of our wineries, all of our vineyards are all practicing everything that they can do as a best practice in sustainability. So for us, the biggest one is that certified California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, so that all of our vineyards and wineries are certified through. If you see Live, that is a program that's really unique to Oregon. And so we use that program up in Oregon. And then in the Central Valley, we do SIP certified. But really the message that I'm trying to get across there is we believe strongly in third-party sustainability certification. So you see we do it across all of our properties. And the reason you see Matanzas Creek featured in the bottom there is we're very excited that you're now going to be able to see certified sustainable on more of our wines that are coming into the marketplace, which means we've done a full chain of custody audit to verify that wine throughout the entire lifespan has followed the best practices that it can in terms of sustainability. We're also one of the first wine companies to start paying our outside growers. So there's times where we work with outside growers to purchase fruit, and we pay them a sustainable premium because we want to ensure that all of our growers are also getting third-party certified and then giving us certified fruit to make wine with. So I think that is very exciting to see. Kind of we have that, and then you have that other seal of approval, and you can have confidence in Jackson Family Wines really embracing sustainability and then getting vetted by a third party on that front. And in addition to our certification, we've also gotten a number of awards and recognitions. And so you'll see here from the drinks business to the EPA Green Power Partnership, getting the Climate Leadership Awards, which we were very excited about because that's not in wine. That's just for companies leading the way on climate action. And then also this in 2019, we got the Wine Enthusiast Wine Star Award for some of our climate work that I'll mention at the tail end of the presentation. So hopefully you can see here, we're very excited for all of the people acknowledging the work that we're doing in this space. So now let me talk about what is that work? What are we excited about? And what you see in front of you, this is our 4 key pillars that we focus on when we talk about Rooted for Good. So we talk about social responsibility, and we want to put people first. We want to focus both on the people that make up Jackson Family Wines, the larger, as we like to say, Jackson Family Wines, family, but also the communities that we operate in. And so that's looking at how we can play a positive role there, how we can support community organizations and kind of our volunteer program in the community. Carbon footprint, that's what I get very excited about, and I think we'll refer to it quite a bit in this presentation. There, we have the largest solar array in the wine industry. So we are currently 30% powered by on-site renewables, and we're rapidly working to scale that up. So next time we talk, I'm hoping I'm going to have a higher number to share. And most importantly, when we think about carbon emissions, we've reduced our absolute carbon emissions 17.5% since 2015. And so I will talk more about that later, but reducing our carbon emissions has been a key focus for us and helps us figure out kind of where true north is as we measure our impact. For environmental stewardship, we will talk a lot about the vineyards, and I can talk to you about all the things that make our vineyards unique, but we don't talk as much about, and I think we should, all the unplanted land that we have. So right now we have over half our land, 60% is unplanted and left in its natural state. And we like to think that's part of the terroir, that really these vineyards exist in magical locations, and that ecosystem helps actually inform the flavor and kind of the characteristics of that vineyard. So I think that's very exciting. Also, you can see, we talk about our zero waste efforts when we talk about kind of our environmental commitment, and there's a lot of other things there, but I'll keep moving. For water conservation, for those of you who are kind of aware of some of the situations in California, we have now been through a number of historic droughts, and so we want to be very mindful of how we use water. And so probably won't get as much of a chance to talk about it on this presentation, but we have really led creating new technology for the wine industry, especially within our wineries, to help dramatically cut their water use. So you can see we've reduced our water use 43% since 2008. That's something we can continue to focus on. And a lot of times we find that as we focus on ways to reduce our water use or improve in other areas, it actually gives us good feedback into the winemaking process. And so we can always then continue to have that come back to how are we making wine, what's best for wine quality, you know, what helps us be innovative in terms of figuring out the future of winemaking. And so that's kind of, you know, our four key pillars. I think when we look at where we're going from here, that 2030 roadmap, these are the goals that we have within each pillar. So for social responsibility, we want to build a workplace where diversity, equity, and inclusion thrive while empowering our employees to foster more resilient communities. That's a key focus for us, and I think we're continuing to focus on how we can incorporate DEI principles throughout our organization, how we operate, how we make wine, how we continue to grow. On climate action and greenhouse gas emissions, we have a goal of cutting our emissions in half by 2030 and then becoming climate positive by 2050. And for both of those, we plan to do that without the use of carbon offsets. So I think that is a goal that aligns with the best available science about what we need to do to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's an area where we've been very active about saying, this is a place where we think we and the whole wine industry can lead. For land conservation and farming, we have an exciting goal to have 100% of our estate vineyards practice regenerative farming by 2030. And when I say our estate vineyards, we have over 13,000 acres that we farm. So that's, you know, quite a large portfolio, and we're working on finding nature-based solutions that can be part of how we farm and how we make great grapes year after year. And then on water management, again, we want to double down on how we continue to be proactive with water management. So our goal is to reinforce our commitment to water conservation and water quality improvement by enhancing our local watersheds. And the reason why that says watersheds is all of our vineyards, all of our wineries operate within these ecosystems, and we really want to think about how we can help balance that. So we've done a lot of very interesting work where we're not thinking just about our own water use, but how we can really be a watershed steward and how we can actually help enhance, you know, all the aquatic life that lives in the creeks, how we can think about those seasonal fluctuations of water throughout the year. And so right now it's actually interesting, you know, as we speak, we're expecting rain tonight, and we have a number of our wineries that actually do rainwater capture. So the style of winemaking that we practice quite a bit, especially for our Pinots, is open top fermentation. And so that means that we've actually been able to, when we're done fermenting wine in those tanks, we're able to use those same tanks to capture rainwater. And then we can use those rainwater for different processes across our winery, like cleaning equipment or in our cooling tower. So just kind of a fun story where we can start to think about creative ways to really be efficient with our water use. Did not mean to do that. So I may skip through some of these other slides briefly, just since we kind of talked a little bit about them, but just at a high level, want to emphasize that family is in our company's name. And so we are consistently thinking about the people who work for us, especially having just come through COVID. I think it's really been a time where we've had to think about how do we protect and prioritize employees? How do we make decisions that are safe? How do we create pathways where people, want to stay involved with the family for the long run? And I think, that has been, for me, I've now been at Jackson Family about 5 years, and it's been this incredible part of being part of the company and the organization is really to see that commitment to the people. So with this, as I mentioned before, DEI is a large part of our focus, really doing kind of this inward reflection about what we can change and how we can continue to lead in this space and make sure that we have a diverse group of employees and winemakers, and we are well represented in terms of, mirroring kind of what all of our customers look like. So I think that's very exciting. Creating career pathways, having wellness-centered benefits. And then some of this, you'll see the overlap. I think within our focus on social responsibility, we also look at some of our green procurement plans as they relate to kind of all of the partners we have locally in the communities where we operate. So climate action, greenhouse gas emissions, I mentioned this previously, and I think I'll probably skip over this mostly right now because this is where we'll dive in just a minute. But this to me is an incredibly exciting opportunity where, again, Jackson Family and the wine industry has a chance to lead and really showcase how wine can be proactive in creating climate solutions. Land conservation and farming. I love this picture. I love all the work that we're doing with trying to integrate livestock back into our vineyards. And I think when we talk about regenerative farming, that is a huge opportunity to look at reimagining how we can farm in a way that really enhances soil health. And so that's really where we've been devoting a lot of research and doing a lot of work to think about how are we not just growing the best grapes possible, but how are we really treating our vineyards as an ecosystem and thinking about soil health as creating this long-term investment in the lands and in the future. So typically, I think regenerative farming, many people may be familiar, many people may not be familiar. It's a whole suite of different practices that you can do. And I think some of the basic ones that have the biggest impact on carbon in the vineyard are our use of cover crops, our application of compost, integration of animals, and then doing minimal tilling. And minimal tilling is where you actually will kind of plow or break up the soil. So those combination of practices, they help us really increase the amount of soil organic matter in the soil. And soil organic matter is not the only thing that's important, but it's a very good indicator of the health of the soil. And by doing that, we're actually looking at how we can use our vineyards to be carbon sinks, to actually increase the carbon that's in the ground. And so this can be a nature-based solution that helps us actually decrease our carbon footprint and increase the health of our vineyards at the same time. So I think this is very exciting. And again, we've committed to have this practiced across 100% of our 13,000 acres by 2030. For water, we talked through this a little bit earlier. You can see underneath, we have the recharge, revitalize, recycle, and research. And I think this is just exciting. Recharge really emphasizes the fact that we are watershed stewards. And it's not just the water that we use, but it's thinking about kind of our role in that ecosystem. So we've just had a lot of rain just the last 2 weeks. And right now we're trying to think about how can we slow that rainfall to really get as much to percolate into the soil? How can we try to recharge all of our rivers, our groundwater, everywhere possible? And there's even programs we do kind of in the middle of the summer during droughts where we've been able to actually work with local agencies and actually release water back into the creeks from our reservoirs when we've had coho salmon that have been dealing with critically low water levels, like that's a way that we can actually be proactive in doing something that's not related to our farming operations, but where we see we can directly benefit, the local ecosystem. So I think a lot of work there is very exciting. And I think that's going to continue to develop as we try to make sure that we are managing water as best as possible. That recycle bullet is really us thinking about how we can use every single drop of water twice. So we use water in our wineries, and then after we're done using it, we clean it up to the extent we can reuse it for irrigation. And there we're able to make sure we can maximize every drop of water. And then with research, I think we're continuing to try to find ways to innovate. And so before, I mentioned new technology, we helped really launch companies that are focused on new ways of doing things. And so whether that's from washing barrels, and we have probably more barrels than anyone else in the US. So I think like for us, barrel washing has been a huge area where we've been able to develop technology that's been able to cut the water use we use for washing barrels by 60%, to cleaning tanks, where we've helped fund research that has enabled UV light. So it's a waterless tank sterilization method. And so techniques like that help us reduce our water use, but both of those technologies then got integrated into kind of just what other wineries were doing. And so that's helping move the whole industry to saying, again, how can we be more efficient with our water use? So the thing that I get most excited about, and hopefully you can tell, is our goal on climate. And so here, if you can see in this graph, we have made this pledge to cut our emissions in half by 2030. So that's that first little blue line you see, and then become climate positive by 2050. And you can see since 2015, we are already well on our way. So, before I mentioned that 17.5% reduction, you can see how we're tracking towards that goal of cutting our emissions in half. And this is what really the whole world needs to do to meet the Paris Climate Accord, to meet all the research that the IPCC has put out to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is us saying, this is what the science is saying we need to do to decarbonize, and we are doing it. We are putting it into practice. And the reason I get excited about this, besides the fact that it's us taking responsibility and leadership to decarbonize, is this work is very hard. I'll just be straightforward. Like when we talk about decarbonizing at this time scale, it requires rethinking how we do business. And so I am continually impressed by the Jackson family's commitment to reimagine what the future looks like, and then to think creatively about how we can help shape a world where we can continue to grow, award-winning wines year after year. And climate change is this existential threat to making wine, right? When we talk about terroir, when we talk about all that goes into kind of producing the flavor of that grape, the climate is this key aspect. And so for us, being responsible and kind of taking initiative on responding to the climate, both lets us be responsible, but it also helps ensure that we can continue to make wine in these amazing vineyard locations well into the future. So I say that, and I show this chart about us reducing emissions. What are our emissions? And you'll probably hear a lot of people, when we talk about wine sustainability, talk about their carbon footprint. And so I just thought I'd show you our carbon footprint. This is what makes up our emissions. And I think it really helps to see this, to get a sense of what's behind the curtain. So I'm going to throw a little bit of greenhouse gas terminology at everybody, but hopefully this will be easy to follow. It helps if we start by looking at colors. So the green color that you see, that's called scope 1 emissions. And scope 1 emissions mean those are emissions that occur on our property or with our equipment. So you can think about when we use natural gas to heat things, when we put fuel in our trucks, anything like that, that's scope 1. Those are emissions that occur on our site. Scope 2 emissions come from electricity. So that's blue. You can see that blue line. That's any emissions associated with electricity that we use. And scope 3 emissions, which are almost always the largest for any company, those are emissions that are part of our supply chain. So they come based on business decisions that are associated with us, but they're not necessarily things we did. So a lot of times, when we package our wine in glass bottles, the emissions that occurred there came at the glass manufacturing plant. They didn't come for us, but they're still part of how we produce wine. So that shows up in our scope 3 emissions. So those are those 3 different categories. And if you can see what we've done here is we've actually put out, our top 10. So you can see number 1 is glass. So glass is about 18% of our total carbon footprint. If we look over, number 2 is distribution. So the second piece is how we get our wine to you, at Cork and Fork, like figuring out how to get a case of wine from Sonoma County all the way to Washington, D.C., like collectively, that is a big part of our footprint. And so as we go through as a company and we try to say, how are we going to cut our emissions in half? We look at each one of these categories individually, and then we figure out different initiatives we can implement to try to reduce. So if you look at this next slide, this is some of our key working groups that are behind this. So when I talk about zero emission vehicles, since we know that some of our emissions come from our own vehicles, we're piloting things using electric trucks and electric tractors. Very exciting. We'll have some fun news to report back, but like that is the way that we would address emissions there. Not related to our emissions, but when we talk about how do we be good stewards for the water that we use, our water conservation and reuse group is looking at all different opportunities, from how do we recharge our aquifers to, in this picture, we're exploring different ways to reduce reservoir evaporation, right? So trying to get very creative with all the different things we can do there. On packaging, we've been working on lightweighting our bottles and then looking at other techniques we can do, kind of partnering with our glass manufacturers, making sure that we're getting as much recycled content in each glass bottle as possible, and doing different techniques like that to make sure that that glass bottle is as low carbon as possible. And so that's going to be a big area for us to keep focusing on. Product transport, we have a picture of an electric truck and rail because those are the big levers we're trying to pull there, right? We're working with our distributors and trying to get as much of our wine shipped via rail or via electric trucks as possible. So you can kind of go through the list and see that stuff, from social responsibility, us volunteering in our community, renewable energy, us installing more solar and hopefully a wind turbine in the very near future, regenerative farming, which can actually suck that carbon back into our vineyards while improving our vineyard health. And then, at a lot of our wineries there, it's Hartford, Family Court scene there. You can see powered by renewable energy. We're trying to have that be a showcase ranch so people can go tasting there and you can actually see what does it look like to visit a winery that's powered by renewable energy that has these regenerative farming practices. Like go taste, experience, like see for yourself. So this is kind of how we go from that graph of decarbonization to like, what does this look like in implementation? This is what it looks like in implementation. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually talk about our work in the vineyards, just because if you talk wine, like really the vineyard is where it happens, right? And so here you can see this is at, for our La Crema winery, this is the Sara Lee's estate. So it's the tasting room associated with that winery. And the Sara Lee's vineyard is really a pretty remarkable location. I think it's some of my favorite wines come from this vineyard. But in this picture, you can see work that we've been doing on a 5-year pilot project to actually study how we can sequester more carbon in the soil. So we have 6 different variables that are set up in terms of whether we're tilling, whether we're adding compost, how we're applying, what cover crops we're using. So there's 6 different variables that are done on both Chardonnay and then Pinot fields side by side. And over that 5-year period, we're actually working with our local college to actually measure changes in water infiltration, soil health, soil organic carbon. And so this is a way that we can actually try to pioneer some of the science that is going to help not just us, but the whole wine industry look at how we can better incorporate vineyard practices that both decrease emissions first and then sequester carbon second. So far in this talk, I've mostly talked about what we're doing at Jackson Family Wines, but when we take a step back, we also realize that if we want to have change, we need to work with others. And so that's why I'm incredibly excited that in 2019, we partnered with the Torres family in Spain and started International Wineries for Climate Action. And that group has then catalyzed wineries from around the world who really want to lead on reducing their emissions in line with science. And we now have this coalition of wineries that are actively working to share best practices and ensure that everyone is following the same rigorous standards for measuring and then decreasing their carbon emissions. And International Wineries for Climate Action has now been approved by the UN Race to Zero as a partner. And we're following the methodology from Science-Based Targets. So really, this is a way to kind of create that dream team of wineries that are focused on taking climate action, following kind of the international guidance that's out there and aligning with the UN Race to Zero. And so this to me is where we step outside of Jackson Family Wines and we start looking at what we can do across the wine world. And you can see this is the guidance that we put out essentially to help wineries figure out how do you measure all your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and then how do you get it verified by a ISO accredited verifier to make sure everybody's doing the same process. We're all being very consistent and rigorous. So when we do that, you saw that pie chart earlier of Jackson Family Wines emissions. We also get a sense of where are their emissions hotspots across the wine industry. And so this is a kind of aggregate of IWCA members where you can kind of see we're all dealing with some of the same challenges. And so if we work on those together, there's an opportunity for us to innovate, lead, and find common solutions. And so that's where I think I want to wrap up just this really short presentation about what we're doing, which hopefully scratches the surface. I think, I'd invite everyone to visit our website and look at, some of our videos on our YouTube channel that dive in much, much deeper into this. But just stepping back, I think Jackson Family Wines, we are, a family wine-based company that wants to take responsibility and then show leadership on climate. With International Wineries for Climate Action, we're looking at how we can do that across the wine industry. And I think that's incredibly exciting to see how we can collaborate together to lead that. And IWCA is really trying to influence just the broader global movements that we see, whether it's sustainability efforts in agriculture or it's companies or politicians stepping up. I think when we think about what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go, we call our effort Rooted for Good because we believe that our future can be brighter than our past. And we think to get there, we need to work collectively. And so that's why I think we're excited about the work that we're doing. We see the need to work with partners to get there. And we also see the need to kind of connect directly with our customers who can help us figure out what's the best pathways to get there. With our Rooted for Good efforts, they are ambitious and they are bold, and we are excited to take that on. And so we're going to need help as we figure out how to do things differently. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a sneak peek into the behind the scenes at Jackson Family Wines. And I hope that when you see our wines in the marketplace, you realize that we are trying to lead and figure out how to farm differently because we're trying to figure out how to farm for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aaron. That was a brilliantly comprehensive overview of what's happening over at Jackson Family Wines. And I'm sure that's only 1% of really what's happening behind the scenes to get all of these programs up and running. It's absolutely breathtaking to see what's going on there. Quick question for you. When you look forward, what does sustainable viticulture look like to you as a sustainability manager a decade from now?
That is a great question. And I think it's one that we keep asking ourselves every day. So in terms of the process of doing this, it's really exciting that setting our Rooted for Good goals has really created all of these working groups across the company where we have winemakers and vineyard managers and kind of just all of our leadership really involved in doing research and then figuring out new techniques to kind of put things in play. And I think some of the key themes that we see with regenerative farming are going to play out. But what we've learned is that there's not a one size fits all solution, especially because our vineyards are all over the place. I think just within California, we're farming from Santa Barbara all the way up to, like Lake and Mendocino County, and their growing conditions are quite different. So I think we find that we need to do different practices, but nature-based solutions, I think, will underpin a lot of what we do, where we're trying to actually look at the vineyard as part of a larger ecosystem. I also think we're entering a very exciting phase where we're starting to see more and more technology get integrated into the vineyard. There's a lot of places where vineyards have probably been slower to address technology, but I think we're seeing some very exciting innovations, and some of our work on really modeling soil carbon sequestration and then sharing that research, not just within the company, but with IWCA, we're looking at kind of insights we're getting from across the globe. That's going to help us make more and more data-driven decisions that help us focus not just on this year's crop or next year's crop, but really like what creates healthy vineyard conditions for the future. And with some of what we see with regenerative farming in particular, we see benefits to overall vineyard soil health, but you especially see that in outlier years. So years where there's a very hard-hitting drought or cold temperatures, like those outlier years, I think we oftentimes talk about resiliency, right? And so I think when we think about how do we increase the vineyard health, we're oftentimes focused both on creating that positive trends, but really making it more resilient to those shocks. So my hope is that if we combine all of those, kind of an appreciation for concepts, but the understanding that each vineyard is unique, really detailed data that sometimes gives us information down to the vine, and then this concept of let's integrate nature-based solutions where we can design things and actually create a balance just by how we operate it. So our sheep can really do most of the weeding for us. Those, I think, principles will probably play out over the next 10 years, and I'm going to be very excited to watch it.
Thank you. I know you've answered this upcoming question about 3 different ways now, but here's an opportunity to sort of bring it all together one last time for us before we say goodnight. How can wine or the wine industry lead action on climate change?
It's a great question. And yes, I've probably already answered that a few times, but I think saying it in a different way for me actually is very helpful to highlight the point. Wine in the big picture is actually a very small percentage of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think really it's important for us to take action, but in so many ways, what we do is actually very powerful for really being a showcase of what's possible. And wine is really unique that a lot of times when I go and buy carrots or if I buy anything else at the grocery store, you don't directly connect that back to the farm in the same way that you do with wine. But if we're going to open up, a bottle of Siduri, I'm going to talk to you about the vineyard that it came from, because that's really part of the story. That's this essence of like what makes that wine great. So much of it goes back to the very specific place and kind of the story behind the bottle. And so with wine, with kind of having that direct connection back to place, and then with wine really being kind of in this place where I think just maybe being a luxury product or really just being appreciated for kind of all the work that goes into it, we have more of a platform to speak than, I hate to beat up on carrots, but just like some other people in agriculture, it gives us the way to showcase, okay, this is a way where we can actually find climate solutions and build that into how we grow grapes. So there's so many ways that decarbonizing, reducing our emissions is important, but I think equally exciting is where we can actually use our vineyards to sequester carbon. And so much work is still being done there. I think we still need to do more work to flesh out those possibilities and to figure out how we quantify and account for that in a way that is verifiable. But big picture, I think when we create products that then help build the world that we want to see, that is immensely powerful. And so if you are buying wine and you know that it's solar powered, or you know that it's being farmed in a way that actually helps protect the ecosystems that it's a part of, or is, sequestering carbon or fighting climate change, like all of those things are ways that wine can both make an impact in and of itself, but then really be a showcase of what's possible within agriculture, within kind of the broader business world. Just as we rethink how we do things, I think wine really has that platform to stand on and say, we can figure this out, and we're doing this together. We want you to join us in this effort. And because climate change is this existential threat to so many wine regions and wines that we've really grown to love, it also is this good reminder of what we have to lose if we don't take action. So we get excited about the opportunities. We have a real incentive to move on this because we want to keep producing this amazing wine year after year. And my hope is that by us taking action, we actually encourage others to join us too, because this is not a problem that any one organization can solve on their own, but collectively we can make a brighter world.
Very well said. Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer. All of the work that you're doing out there with Jackson Family Wines, it's as I said, it's remarkable, and it is definitely infiltrating the entire industry. The work that you're doing with the electric tractors, I've heard some of your studies being shown in presentations through the Porter Protocol. They did a seminar and you were mentioned. So it's just amazing to see the crossover and the sharing of that information, and it's so collaborative and so helpful. So thank you for your voice and your participation and sharing your time with us this evening. So I'm just going to offer everyone some final thoughts here. And yes, before I do that, Aaron, I know I've asked you a couple of questions, but would you like to offer your final thoughts before I offer mine?
I think that, the last thing I'd say, Antoinette, is thank you for leading this. I think really what helps is having more people involved in the conversation, having more people learn about the process. So just wanted to say thank you. Hearing all of the different speakers you've had in kind of this sustainability series, I think learning about this and then learning how everyone can be part of this is immensely powerful. So thank you for that.
I'd like to follow that up as well, Antoinette. Thank you both very much, Aaron and Antoinette, for going forward with this and providing the insight and the platform for which to, to put forth that insight. Definitely.
Brady, we thank you. Cork and Fork thanks you, and I thank you on a personal note for connecting us with Aaron and making this happen. So we appreciate very much your team here in DC and what you do for us on the East Coast. So I strongly encourage all viewers to visit the Rooted for Good website, jacksonfamilywines.com/rooted for good, and check out their YouTube page as well, the Jackson Family Wines YouTube page, where there is a range of in-depth video programs to view and enjoy. They are doing an amazing series. It's about one every month, or I think maybe a little bit closer space than that, and they're in-depth, comprehensive, and they have an amazing range of guest speakers, very informative. So a great resource for anyone looking to do more research on sustainability in wine in general. So thank you to all for joining us. Access to past masterclasses may be found on our YouTube page, Cork and Fork, as well as by scanning the QR code presented in store at Cork and Fork in Logan Circle, which will direct you to the YouTube recordings. Additional information about our online programs may be found on our website at corkandfork.co under calendar. Thank you again for joining us. Aaron, Brady, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.